Greetings, nerds. This is Will Polk, producer and co-host of the Seeing a Nerd podcast. Thank you for joining me as I'm going to be discussing Star Trek Picard, episode 37, titled Dominion. This episode was written by Jane Maggs and directed by Deborah Campermer. This is a spoiler discussion, so if you haven't watched the episode, stop now, go watch it, and then come back and join me here for my discussion on what happened in this episode. All right, let's get to it. So, my overall thoughts on the episode this week is that this really seemed to be a bottle show, and that the way it was structured, it seemed that, and we noted this on our main show this week, it seemed to be either part two of a two-parter, or it could be part two of a three-part arc to close out the second act of the season. But again, I really love the way that this episode took some very moral and ethical questions and brought it to the forefront this week. And we've had it all throughout the season, but when Star Trek really is nailing on all cylinders, that's one of the things that they do so well. And having Beverly and John Luke discussing some of the moral questions that have come up, I really like that. And we'll get into that here in our fuller discussion. Also, the use of the score this week was perfect. Head fake when it needed it, but also setting the highs and lows as far as a very exposition driven episode. Thought the score really carried the ball forward with that. Got a lot of answers to some questions, but of course, like we've seen all season, get more questions as when one is answered, we get three more. So we had that happen here in this episode. And then finally, as far as the performances, exceptional performances by everyone, but really want to highlight the performance by both LeVar Burton and Amanda Plummer in particular, because they really just nailed it this week. Hopefully, I know TV Line does a Performer of the Week, and I'm really hoping that they both get noticed. So with that, let's jump right into some of the points of the episode I wanted to focus on. We start with the whistling of Three Blind Mice, again, as I noted. Score was definitely a big part of this episode. And we see the Chintaka ship scrapyard. Now, the Chintaka system, for folks who have long-time Star Trek fans, know that the Chintaka system was on the edge of Federation and Cardassian space. The border moved, several times back and forth, but this system in particular was very notable in DS9 because the Federation had significant wins and losses during the Dominion conflict there with the siege of AR-58, with the win of holding that relay station, but also USS Defiant, the original Defiant, was lost in the second battle. We see someone reaching out to anyone that they can help them, because the Titan is still on the run. They're hiding in this scrapyard. And we hear a very, very familiar voice, and we see that it's Tuvok. It was a great moment there. They were talking, another Admiral Janeway reference, and so we're going to get Kate Mulgrew at some point in this season of Picard. I mean, they can't keep dropping Admiral Janeway without her showing up at some point. Of course, it was noted that she was going to be part of the Frontier Day festivities in this episode. That's probably where we'll get it. But while this is going on, Seven does the techniques that they've learned to discover how to ferret out these new changelings, because their Achilles heel is not knowing intimate details about people. So they go through it. She figures out, that this changeling says all the right things to a point. And then we hear the wonderful music of the Star Trek Voyager. And I think all of us brought a smile to all our collective faces. And if it didn't, then I don't know what to say. But but we learned that it was a head fake again. And when Seven does, and she's really coming into her own as far as a commanding officer and a captain. And she deduces that. Let me do a few more follow-up questions, and then in doing so, discovers that this is indeed a changeling, and the Tuvok changeling. The real Tuvok is captured, and he better not die, because if he does, I will say we will riot. But if he is captured and suffering his fate where he wished he would die, and then the changeling Tuvok morphs into Captain Riker, and a very corpse-looking Captain Riker, and which was very chilling, and again just underscores the Dominion, the changeling threat here. We then move from that to Beverly and Picard having discussions about Jack. Jack talks about the Irumodic syndrome, which we later learn in the episode that Picard's diagnosis may not have been actually correct by whenever they talk to Data. One of the bigger points in this discussion between Beverly and Jean-Luc is the moral and ethical questions. I mean, of course, as Beverly being a doctor, first thing is not to do no harm. But in their discussion, she figures out a countermeasure that could be weaponized, and if it were weaponized, that the ethical questions come in. If we use this, then we could be committing genocide, and that Section 31 did basically almost was successful in doing so, with feeding that morphogenic virus to the changelings in the Great Link by infecting Odo and having him take it back to them. So we got that moral question again. But the other thing too, which we learn in this scene, is what they'd start to have a supposition as far as why did they need Picard's body, and Jean-Luc talks about having his identification confirmed for Frontier Day activities through a genetic. So maybe something related to that. Also one of the things I put out there last week was, given that they want Jack and Jack's DNA and or Jack period, maybe it has tied to they need some clean DNA with not infiltrated with Borg components to build their doppelganger. So Vadic has been working with, because it's clear that the face is not a changeling, but he's on the strike with the Vadic and the face, talking about the mission again and succeed trying to that there. But we get, there's a lot of things going on there that puts some clear answers out to some of our questions. But then, of course, like the show's been doing all season, it answers one question, but get us three more after that. So Jean-Luc, like all of us would do in this situation, we go talk to Data, because Data was, as we learned, the Data column on Days from Station had the manifest, and of course last week did confirm that one of the things that was taken was Jean-Luc's body, to see how all these things are connected to Frontier Day. And then while we're there, we get a situation where I would like to hear your thoughts on this, but in this scene we learn that from Geordi that Lore, Data, Soong, and B4 are all partitioned, and Geordi, know that it would be very difficult to a lot of technobabble, but long and short of it is Lore, B4, and Soong were all the four listed, but they did not mention Law. So I wonder if there is going to be something that Law is going to be utilized to blend all of these four partitioned personalities. Of course, we did see the fight between Data and Lore. Speaking of Lore, the Agent of Chaos is back, and he definitely was throwing the insults at Picard left and right, as far as and Geordi and Alondra as well. And it just shows why Lore is just an asshole. I mean, he is the Agent of Chaos, and he was definitely going to clearly cause more trouble. And of course, we see that war again within Data and Lore, as far as trying to take over Lore, trying to take over this new golem. But in the meantime, we get a situation. We get Jean-Luc and Jack, and Jack feels very guilty again about uh, all of this happening because of him, and especially about Will getting captured. And really my reference at the end of the episode. I mean, Vadic also notes that too, where she's like, "Look, all of this could have been avoided if y'all had just given us, essentially, if y'all had just given us Jack to begin with, we wouldn't be in this situation. But here we are." But Vadic and they spring a trap. Vadic does board the ship, and then Sydney and Jack, who are just adorable. I mean, let's just ship them already. I mean, they're great together. And there was a nice little moment there where they were on the turbo shaft lift, and we see Jack's powers manifest themselves. And that scene, I don't know if he was I don't know if he was reading her mind, and that's why he reached over and touched her hand, or what. But that'll come in handy later in the episode. But Vadic is captured, and her goons. Some of them are taken care of, but we do get a situation where Vadic and has a confrontation with Beverly and Jean-Luc. And during that discussion with Beverly and Jean-Luc, we learned several things. One, that Beverly, Jean-Luc, and Jack, Vadic calls into question Jack's lineage in some regards, that he wasn't meant for them. So, is Jack a clone of Jean-Luc and Beverly? Was he any number of things that could happen there? But clearly, whatever's going on, it's confirmed here in this scene that her mission is she doesn't care about Jack. Her ends are to something else. But the face, whoever it is, clearly needs Jack to do whatever nefarious thing that's going to be necessary to carry out this plot on Frontier Day. But we also learn that Vadic puts down a very damning story about the Federation here and Daystrom Station, and what Section 31 was doing with her as far as her origin story. And we finally get it here, some answers to who Vadic really is in this episode. And we learn that Vadic was a doctor, and we hear that chilling whistle come back with the 3 blind mice. And we learned that the doctor there, Vadic, on the station, was doing experimentation with her, on her, and some other changelings that were prisoners of war. So timeline wise, I assume this was either about the time that the hostilities began between Federation and the Dominion. I know I saw some on Trek Culture. They had a very good breakdown of this as well, if you want to check out their reviews and thoughts on it, but their ups and downs this week. But at its core, because of the work that they were doing there on the morphogenic matrix of these changelings, they caused the changelings to evolve. So I think it's very clear that these changelings did not get infected with the virus that was developed by Section 31 that was sent to the Great Link. I think these folks were given something else, or evolved into a situation where they could morph, they could recreate blood and other things for survival, which is very interesting, because that's similar to what Odo did whenever he was first found by Dr. Mora years ago in under Bajor. And at least with Vadic here, she's sort of a diverse Odo, where Odo basically morphed to spare himself so that Dr. Mora would stop doing all these experiments on them. These changelings exacted revenge, and they murder her, and then took the vengeance of Vadic, not because it was that they were trying to maybe emulate or a person for even though Odo and Mora had a very contentious relationship, but never got to the place where Odo wanted to murder him. Whereas Vadic here, she took on their visage, and it was just a daily reminder of their hate of the Federation and what they were doing to them. But the other critical thing here is we learned that this project is called Project Proteus, which is a very fitting name because Proteus was a Greek god who could manipulate and change into different shapes. So of course that makes sense as far as why Section 31 named their project the same type of thing. But one of the other really critical things that happens here in their discussions is Picard always, when this issue comes up about the genocide and everything, he always says, well, look, we gave them the cure. But in reality, Starfleet and the Federation voted not to give them the cure. And it was only because of Dr. Bashir and O'Brien capturing Sloan from Section 31 that Bashir was able to steal the morphogenic virus antidote from Sloan, and then they gave it to Odo so that Odo could go back and save his people in the link. So she's right in the sense that she's very evil, but she's also very wrong too. I mean, this is a very, like, I love the writing here because it's very, this is when Star Trek is at its best, is when it gets you as it were to question all the things that are going on as far as some of the moral questions that's going on here. But also Jean-Luc has some plausible deniability too, because we also see that he wasn't aware of all these things that were going on at Daystrom Station. The Enterprise, in many situations during the Dominion War, we've seen in the past where they were not around. So Jean-Luc does have some plausible deniability where he just did not know what his superiors were up to. And even though we've seen places where other members of Starfleet were aware of what Section 31 was doing. I mean, Admiral Ross, for example, in Inter Item Set at Legates, whenever he was working with Section 31 to do some maneuvering with get the Romulans, the person they wanted as far as the head of the Romulan Empire. But here we see that in this case Jean-Luc did not. But the other big thing that came about in this sequence is Jean-Luc and Beverly having a very hard discussion about ethics and morality and are we at the place in our lives where we're willing to do what is necessary to save the Federation. And we see when Lore, the agent of chaos, breaks down the force fields that they had set up, we get the answer to that question is it looks like they're willing to, because Beverly and Picard did fire their phasers. Unfortunately, they didn't have it. Either Vadic had some hell of armor or they just didn't have it on vaporize. But that Vadic was able to escape. So it looked like in this sense they were willing to kill. And maybe they were willing to offset that countermeasure that Beverly developed. But we just put a pin in that because that'll probably come up later in the season. Speaking of Lore, we get a very heartfelt moment with Geordi trying to appeal the data to come out of Lore because Lore had overtaken the Golem. And we really get a scene here where we really see how the loss of data impacted Geordi, because Geordi was other than Jean-Luc, Geordi was the next to last person to see him before going over to the Scimitar to save Jean-Luc in Star Trek Nemesis from Picard's clone. But the other thing is their relationship is just, we haven't seen the good Data Geordi throughout the movies. Some of that got kind of subsided as it really the Trinity more became hard and but and Data always were tight, and we saw the impact. We got to see the impact of Data's loss on Geordi on screen until this very, very just amazing perform moment of art. And it really spoke. I got a tear in my eye just watching it whenever I was watching it, because it was very poignant, and it works. I mean, Data is able to wrestle control back from Lore within the Golem, and then we that was a very pivotal moment. But of course, by that point, Vodek had escaped, and Shaw was trying to run her down, but unfortunately, Shaw was on the on the turbo shaft, the changelings and stuff. He comes out on the bridge, all beaten up, and I was so worried that that Shaw was that he had met his end, but thankfully he had not. But it was a very powerful moment there too, though, with Shaw, where whenever he was on the floor of the bridge, you saw the tear in his eye because he had lost his ship, and Vodek, just is clearly victorious here. She has gotten control of the Titan, which it seems that was her end game, even though the face is end game is something completely different. But with that, that's sort of where we fade to black a bit here in the theory about what's going on with Jack's eyes. Of course, I touched on it earlier with Jack and Sydney. We did see them. Jack helping Sydney with the ability here that we learned he does have telepathic abilities, help her get out of the situation with the changeling whenever they were fighting those individuals when Laura was monkeying around with the force fields. But the other thing about this is, how does this tie to the larger thing, and also gets to what was discussed with Picard and Beverly with Vodek as far as what his true nature is. And we've heard all these theories now. At this point, I'm just ready for them to just answer the damn question. What is going on with Jack Crusher? Just answer it already. We're way into the season. Hopefully at episode 8, we will finally get that next week. The other thing is, what's going on with the face? Is the face a Borg? Given that he's talked about is it Dukat? I mean, of course, with Jack's red eyes, people theorize that maybe Jack's part of the Par race. So maybe this is Dukat reincarnated from. Maybe it's. I've heard Armas. I've heard Future Guy from Star Trek Enterprise. One crazy theory I had is maybe it's Jack Crusher, and Jack's trying to get his body back, off of Vodek's hands for whatever reason. Because it clearly seems that Vodek's motivations were not personal to Jean-Luc. Vodek, her bigger end to all this is getting back at the Federation for what they did to her and to those other changelings in the Daystrom station. This face's motivation, it seems to be something much, much bigger. And so I'm just very curious, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you think those things are, as far as what the big bad's motivation is and who the big bad is. So with that, thank you so much for watching me today. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Follow us on Twitter at CNNerd. Follow us on Instagram, CNN_N_nerd. Bookmark our website. You can see it going here, ticking below at the bottom, www.CNNerdPodcast, to listen wherever you get your podcasts on the audio side, or here on YouTube as well. So thank you again for joining me. Live long and prosper.